What would you do if your parents told you to sleep in their basement while you figured things out? Well, I bought the house across the street and built a rooftop garden they could see from their kitchen window. Here's how I went from basement dweller to homeowner without them knowing, and why the look on their faces when they found out was absolutely priceless. My name's Zoe. I'm 28, and until last year I was living in my parents' basement. Not metaphorically. Picture this. You're holding a UC Berkeley architecture degree with honors, your portfolio is pristine, and you're ready to build the world. Then, reality hits. Nationwide hiring freeze. Construction industry on ice. Every firm putting projects on hold. So, there I was, moving back to my childhood home in Cherrywood, New Jersey, thinking it would be temporary. A few months maybe, just until things picked up. My parents, Lynn and Roger, seemed supportive at first. "Of course you can stay," my mom said, wrapping me in that familiar hug that smelled like lavender and vanilla. "We're family," but then came the tour of my old life. "So, about your room?" Mom said, hesitating at the top of the stairs. "We've been using it for storage while you were away." I peeked inside. My childhood bedroom had been transformed into a graveyard of Christmas decorations, old furniture, and boxes labeled things like random kitchen stuff and Roger's golf things from 1998. "Don't worry, though," she continued, her voice taking on that overly cheerful tone that meant she'd already made a decision I wasn't going to like. "You can make the basement work. You're an adult now." The basement, not your room in the basement or the basement guest room. Just the basement. I followed her downstairs, my feet echoing on the concrete steps. The space was unfinished with exposed pipes running across the ceiling and that perpetual dampness that made everything feel slightly sticky. There was a corner with an old couch and a coffee table that had seen better decades. "See, it's cozy," Mom said, gesturing around like she was showing off a luxury suite. "And you'll have your privacy down here." Privacy, right. Privacy with a furnace that kicked on every 20 minutes and the delightful sound of everyone else's footsteps above my head. But here's the thing about being an adult who just moved back home with nowhere else to go. You smile and say thank you. You tell yourself it's temporary. You convince yourself that beggars can't be choosers. So I set up shop. Bought an air mattress from Target because apparently actual furniture was asking too much. Hung up a shower curtain around my sleeping area for the illusion of walls. Made a desk out of a folding table and a prayer. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of my parents making coffee upstairs, their voices carrying through the thin floor. Normal morning conversation that felt miles away from where I was lying on an air mattress next to the water heater. The job applications became my routine. Sit at my makeshift desk, laptop balanced on the wobbly table, sending out resume after resume into the void. Architecture firms, design companies, even construction outfits that might need someone who understood blueprints. Each rejection email felt like another nail in the coffin of my carefully planned future. But the hardest part wasn't the rejections. It was the way my situation became normal. How quickly my parents adjusted to having their adult daughter living like a refugee in their basement. How they'd forget to save me dinner because we thought you were working late down there. How they'd have friends over and just not mention I existed. That's when Caleb started checking in. Caleb Morrison had been my best friend since middle school. While I went off to Berkeley, he stayed local but managed to land a remote tech job that paid better than most people's office work. He was one of those rare humans who remembered birthdays, sent random check-in texts, and actually listened when you answered, "How are you?" "Zoe, this is insane," he said during one of our coffee meetups at the local diner. "You're literally living in your parents' basement like some kind of punishment." "It's not that bad," I lied, stirring my coffee with way too much focus. "It's just temporary." "When's the last time they asked how your job search was going?" I paused. When was the last time either of my parents asked about my applications, my interviews, my plans, When was the last time they treated me like an adult with goals and ambitions instead of just their daughter who couldn't figure her life out? They're letting me stay for free, I said weakly. In a basement, Zoe. They're letting you stay in a basement for free. Caleb leaned forward, his eyes serious in a way that made me uncomfortable. You graduated with honors from one of the best architecture programs in the country. You're brilliant. You deserve better than being treated like a storage unit with feelings. That conversation stuck with me. Started poking at things I'd been trying to ignore, like how my mom would ask me to keep my stuff in bins because the plumber might need access, how I was expected to keep my toiletries in a shower caddy instead of just in the bathroom, how during family time in the evenings, I was somehow supposed to know to stay downstairs without anyone actually telling me. 3 months in, I developed this weird relationship with sound. I could tell by the footsteps upstairs who was where and what they were doing. Mom's quick, purposeful steps to the kitchen. Dad's heavier, slower movement to his recliner. The distinct sound of the refrigerator opening of chairs scraping against the kitchen floor of life happening above me, while I existed below it. But it was the conversation I overheard one night that changed everything. I was sitting at my folding table working on a portfolio piece just to keep my skills sharp when I heard voices outside. Mom was in the front yard talking to Mrs. Henderson from next door. The basement window was cracked open and their voices carried down perfectly. How's Zoe adjusting to being back home? Mrs. Henderson asked. I stopped typing, my fingers frozen over the keyboard. Oh, Mom laughed, that particular laugh she used when she was about to say something she thought was clever. Zoe, she's figuring things out in the basement. They both laughed, like it was funny, like my entire life situation was some kind of amusing anecdote to share with neighbors. I sat there in the dark, holding a cold mug of tea that had been forgotten hours ago, and felt something shift inside me. The way she said it, figuring things out in the basement, like I was some kind of project she was waiting to see resolve itself. But as I listened to their laughter fade into the evening air, I realized something important. I wasn't figuring things out. I was figuring something out. And that something was going to change everything. That realization should have been empowering. Instead, it kicked off what I can only describe as the slow erosion of my dignity, one small interaction at a time. My new routine became this weird dance of trying to exist without being inconvenient. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. before anyone else was moving around upstairs so I could use the bathroom without running into my parents. I'd make instant coffee in the basement using a hot plate I'd bought from Walmart, because God forbid I disrupt the sacred morning coffee ritual happening in the actual kitchen. My room consisted of that air mattress pushed against the far wall surrounded by plastic storage bins that contained my entire adult life. Clothes in one bin, books in another, personal items crammed into a third. Everything had to be mobile, contained, ready to be moved at a moment's notice. Because that's when the requests started. Zoe, honey, Mom called down the stairs one Tuesday morning. Could you keep your stuff in bins? The plumber might need access back there. The plumber, who as far as I knew hadn't been called and wasn't coming. But sure, let me just compact my existence even further into portable containers. A week later, oh, and could you maybe keep your toiletries in that shower caddy? It just looks neater in the bathroom. Neater, because apparently my toothbrush and shampoo were visual pollution in the family bathroom that I was graciously allowed to use. Then came the invisible rules. The ones nobody explained but that I was somehow supposed to know. Like how family time in the evenings meant I should stay in the basement. Not because anyone told me to, but because when I'd come upstairs to grab a snack or just be around other humans, there was this energy, this subtle shift in conversation that made it clear I was interrupting something. Oh, Zoe, Dad would say, looking up from his newspaper with surprise as if he'd forgotten I lived there. How's the job hunt going? And I'd give some generic answer about still looking while grabbing my snack and retreating back downstairs because staying felt like imposing. The isolation was becoming this living thing. I'd spend hours every day sending out applications, writing cover letters, customizing my portfolio for different firms. And when I'd take breaks, I'd listen to the sounds of normal life happening above me. Family dinners where nobody called down to see if I wanted to join. TV shows watched together while I sat alone with my laptop. I started feeling like a ghost in my own family's house. But the moment that really broke something inside me happened on a Saturday in November. My cousin Brooke was visiting from Philadelphia. Brooke was 22, fresh out of college, working at a marketing firm and living in a cute apartment with roommates. She was everything I used to be: confident, optimistic, convinced that hard work would pay off. Mom was giving her the house tour and I heard them coming down the basement stairs. "And this is where Zoe is staying while she figures things out," Mom said in that tone again. That casual, explanatory tone that made my living situation sound like a choice. I was sitting at my folding table working on a design project trying to maintain some semblance of professional productivity. I looked up with what I hoped was a normal smile. Brooke's face went through this rapid series of expressions. Confusion, then recognition, then something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Wait," she said, looking around at my shower curtain privacy wall and my bins full of life. "This is your room, like for real?" The question hung in the air like a smoke alarm going off. I felt my cheeks burn as I forced that smile wider. "Yeah, it's actually pretty cozy," I lied, gesturing around like I was showing off a studio apartment instead of a corner of an unfinished basement. "And it's quiet for working." Brooke nodded, but I could see her trying to process this. Her 28-year-old cousin, the one who used to babysit her, the one who graduated from Berkeley with honors, living like a college student who couldn't afford rent. Mom quickly redirected the tour upstairs, but the damage was done. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, feeling exposed in a way that made my skin crawl. My phone buzzed. A text from Caleb. "You good?" I stared at those two words for a long time before typing back, "Not even close." He called me 20 minutes later. "Coffee. Now. I'm buying." We met at Sterling's, this little diner that had been our hangout spot since high school. Caleb took one look at my face and ordered me a chocolate chip pancake without asking. Comfort food for emotional emergencies. "Talk to me," he said. So I did. I told him about the bins, about the shower caddy, about feeling like a house guest who'd overstayed her welcome in her own family home. I told him about Brooke's face, about the way my mom talked about me like I was a problem being temporarily stored in the basement. "This is insane, Zoe," Caleb said, his voice getting that edge it got when he was truly angry. "You're being treated like a burden, not like their daughter." "Maybe I am a burden," I said, pushing pancake around my plate. "Maybe they're doing me a favor and I should just be grateful." Caleb leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Listen to me very carefully. You graduated summa cum laude from UC Berkeley. You won design competitions in college. You're brilliant, creative, and capable of incredible things. The job market sucks right now, but that doesn't make you less valuable." I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Maybe it's time you stop waiting for their respect and build your own," he continued. "You don't need their approval to be successful. You don't need their permission to take up space." We sat in silence for a moment while I absorbed that. Build your own. What did that even mean when you're living in your parents' basement with a negative bank balance? That's when I saw it. Walking back to my car, I noticed something I'd somehow missed every other time I'd driven down my street. Across from my parents' house, there was a for sale sign stuck in the front yard of this old duplex. I stopped walking. The house was clearly neglected. Peeling paint, overgrown yard shutters hanging at weird angles. But the bones looked good. The structure seemed solid. And it was right there. Right across the street from the house where I was currently being stored like seasonal decorations. I pulled out my phone and called the number on the sign. "Hi," I said to the real estate agent who answered. "I'm interested in the duplex on Maple Street. When can I see it?" As I scheduled the showing for the next day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not hope that my parents would suddenly start treating me better. Not hope that the perfect job would magically appear. Hope that maybe, just maybe I could create my own solution to this problem. Standing there on the sidewalk looking at that rundown duplex, I started to see possibility instead of problems. I started to see potential instead of peeling paint. And for the first time since moving back home, I started to see a way out that didn't involve waiting for someone else to save me. The next morning, I met Maya Rodriguez at the Duplex. Maya was one of those people who radiated competence and warmth in equal measure. She was probably in her early 30s with this confident energy that made you feel like whatever problem you had, she'd seen it before and knew exactly how to solve it. "So, you're interested in the duplex?" she said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "I have to be honest with you, it needs work. The previous owner was elderly and let some things slide, but the bones are incredibly solid." As we walked up the front path, I could see what she meant. The paint was peeling off the shutters, the front porch had a few loose boards, and the yard looked like it hadn't seen a lawnmower in months. But the foundation looked strong. The roofline was straight, and something about the proportions of the building just felt right. "Built in 1952, Maya said, unlocking the front door. "Classic post-war construction. They built these to last." The inside was a time capsule. Hardwood floors that were scratched but solid, windows that were old but let in beautiful natural light, a kitchen that was straight out of the 1980s but had good layout potential. The whole place had that particular smell of a house that had been closed up too long, but underneath it, I could sense good bones. "The left unit is slightly larger," Maya explained as we toured. "2 bedrooms, 1 bath, living room, kitchen. The right unit is a mirror image but smaller. Perfect for rental income if you wanted to go that route." I walked through the rooms, slowly running my hands along walls, checking the corners where problems usually hid. My architecture training kicked in automatically. The plumbing would need updating. The electrical was probably from the 70s. The kitchen definitely needed a complete overhaul. But I could see it. I could see what this place could become. "What's the asking price?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "185,000, Maya said. "And honestly, in this market, there's room for negotiation. It's been sitting for 3 months." I did quick math in my head. With my student loans and credit card debt, I'd need a down payment I definitely didn't have. But there was something about this place that felt like possibility. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course," Maya said, handing me her card. "But if you're serious, don't wait too long. Houses like this, once someone sees the potential, they move fast." I drove home with my mind racing. The duplex was a long shot, a really long shot. But for the first time in months, I had something to think about other than rejection emails and basement living. That's when my phone rang. "Is this Zoe Martinez?" The voice was professional female with a slight California accent. "Yes, this is Zoe." "Hi, Zoe. This is Jennifer Chen from Nestwork Designs. We received your application a few weeks ago, and I was wondering if you might have time to chat about a position we have opening up." I pulled over. Actually pulled my car to the side of the road because I couldn't trust myself to drive and process this conversation at the same time. "Yes," I said, probably too quickly. "Yes, I'd love to chat." "Great. We're a sustainable architecture startup based in Princeton. We do a lot of green building design, LEED certification consulting, that sort of thing. The position is junior architect starting at $64,000 a year with benefits and potential for growth." $64,000 with benefits. After months of rejection emails and silence, this felt like winning the lottery. "That sounds amazing," I managed to say. "Wonderful. Can you come in for an interview next week, say Wednesday at 2 p.m.? I agreed immediately, set up the details, and hung up. Then I sat in my car for 10 minutes, just breathing. The girl they thought was failing had just got her foot in the door. But here's the thing, I realized sitting there, I wasn't going to tell my parents. Not yet. Because I'd learned something over the past few months about hope and disappointment. I'd learned that sharing good news too early just gave people the opportunity to diminish it. Instead, I started planning quietly. That night, I researched Nestwork Designs thoroughly. I prepared for the interview like my life depended on it, and I started doing math. My Aunt Carmen had left me a small inheritance when she passed away 2 years ago. $15,000 that I'd never touched sitting in a savings account labeled emergency fund. I'd always thought the emergency would be something dramatic, like a medical crisis or my car dying. But maybe this was the emergency. Maybe the emergency was my life being stuck in neutral while everyone around me moved forward. The interview went better than I could have hoped. Jennifer Chen and her partner David Kim were exactly the kind of architects I wanted to work with. They cared about sustainability, about designing buildings that worked with the environment instead of against it. They asked smart questions about my portfolio and seemed genuinely impressed with my senior project on adaptive reuse. "When could you start?" Jennifer asked at the end. "Immediately," I said and meant it. "Great, we'll have an offer letter to you by Friday." Friday came and so did the offer. $64,000 a year health insurance, 2 weeks vacation, and the kind of work that actually mattered. I signed it immediately and then did something that probably wasn't entirely legal. I used that offer letter to get pre-approved for a mortgage. The loan officer at Community First Bank was a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who looked at my application with the expression of someone who'd seen every possible financial situation. "So you're currently living with family," she said, reviewing my paperwork. "Temporarily," I said, "but I have stable employment starting Monday and I have a down payment." She ran the numbers. With my new salary, 15,000 down, and surprisingly good credit, I qualified for a $170,000 mortgage. "The monthly payment would be about $1,300 with taxes and insurance," Patricia said. "That's well within your debt-to-income ratio." I called Maya from the parking lot. "I want to make an offer," I said, "on the duplex grade. What are you thinking?" $165,000, cash down payment, 30-year conventional loan, close in 30 days. There was a pause. That's a strong offer, Zoe. Let me call the sellers." She called back 2 hours later. "Congratulations." They accepted. Was I sat in my car outside the bank, staring at the duplex across the street from my parents' house, and felt something I hadn't experienced since college, the satisfaction of making something happen through my own effort. The timing was perfect in the most ironic way possible. That same evening, while I was at the kitchen table in the basement reviewing mortgage documents, I heard my dad on the phone upstairs. "I don't know what's wrong with kids these days," he was saying to whoever was on the other end. "Zoe's been back for months and she still doesn't seem to have any hustle. No initiative. In my day, you didn't wait for opportunities to find you." I looked down at the purchase agreement I was signing and almost laughed. No initiative. Right. As I signed my name on the final page, I realized something important. I wasn't just buying a house. I wasn't even just buying my independence. I was buying the house they'd have to look at every single day. Every morning, when they made their coffee in the kitchen window, they'd see the duplex where their daughter lived. The daughter who apparently had no hustle. The daughter who was supposed to be grateful for basement accommodations. They'd see the house I bought while they thought I was failing. And they'd have to reconcile those two realities every single day for as long as they lived across the street from me. The most surreal part about transforming your life is how you have to keep living your old life while building your new one. 3 weeks after closing on the duplex, I was still sleeping on an air mattress in my parents' basement. Still keeping my toiletries in a shower caddy. Still pretending that my biggest accomplishment was successfully avoiding being in the way during family time. But across the street, something incredible was happening. Maya had connected me with her brother-in-law, Carlos, who ran a small but reliable contracting crew. Carlos was one of those guys who could look at a problem and immediately see 3 different solutions ranked by cost and effectiveness. "The good news," he said during our initial walkthrough, "is that whoever built this place knew what they were doing. The foundation is solid, the framing is sound. The bad news is that pretty much everything else needs attention." We prioritized ruthlessly. New insulation first, because heating bills in New Jersey winters could bankrupt you. Then, Flooring because those 1950s hardwoods just needed refinishing to be beautiful again. Updated electrical because I wasn't about to burn down my first house. And plumbing that actually worked consistently. What about the roof? Carlos asked, pointing up toward what was currently just raw ceiling joists. I want to build a deck up there, I said. Small but functional. Something where I can actually breathe. Carlos grinned. Now you're talking. A little oasis above the world. Every morning, I'd leave for work at Nestwork Designs, and every evening I'd drive past my parents' house to check on the progress across the street. The sound of hammering and power tools became the soundtrack of my transformation. Nestwork was everything I'd hoped for and more. Jennifer and David treated me like a colleague, not a recent graduate. They gave me real projects, real responsibility. I was working on LEED certification for a community center renovation, designing energy-efficient additions to existing homes, and learning more in a month than I had in my entire final semester of school. But the best part was the paycheck. That first direct deposit felt like validation in digital form. I had income, I had benefits, I had a professional email signature that said Zoe Martinez Junior Architect instead of unemployed basement dweller. The duplex renovation became my evening and weekend obsession. I'd spend hours there, after work, painting walls, helping Carlos install fixtures, making 1,000 small decisions that slowly turned a neglected house into something that felt like home. Caleb started coming by on weekends to help. He was surprisingly handy for a tech guy, and he had this way of asking exactly the right questions. "So, what's the vision for the roof deck?" he asked one Saturday afternoon as we were sanding down the kitchen cabinets. "I'm thinking peaceful," I said. "A place where I can actually think without hearing everyone else's life happening above my head." "What does peaceful look like to you?" I stopped sanding and really considered the question. Plants. Lots of plants. Something green and alive. String lights maybe so it feels cozy at night. A hammock where I can read. Just space that's completely mine. Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "Make it peaceful. Make it yours." That became our unofficial motto for the whole project. Every decision filtered through that lens. The soft gray paint for the living room that would make the natural light feel warm instead of harsh. The kitchen backsplash and sage green subway tiles that would complement whatever plants I eventually added. The bathroom renovation that prioritized a deep soaking tub because after months of basement living, I wanted to be able to take actual baths again. But the rooftop garden became my obsession. I spent lunch breaks at work, sketching plans, researching plants that could handle New Jersey weather, figuring out weight distribution and drainage systems. I designed planners that could double as seating a trellis system for climbing vines and LED lighting that would make the space usable even after dark. The strangest part was maintaining my double life. 3 nights a week, I'd still cook dinner for my family. I'd stand in their kitchen, making pasta or stir-fry while my dad watched the news and my mom sorted through mail, and they'd ask polite questions about my job. "How's work going, honey?" Mom would ask. "Good." I'd say stirring sauce while mentally calculating whether the solar panels I was researching for the duplex would offset enough of my electricity bill to justify the upfront cost. "Really good." "That's nice, dear. It's good to see you finding your footing." Finding my footing? Right. If only they knew that their daughter was currently installing energy-efficient windows in her own house, while they thought she was finding her footing in their basement. The cognitive dissonance was incredible. I'd spend my day designing sustainable building solutions, my evening overseeing the renovation of my own property, and then come home to sleep on an air mattress next to the water heater. But somehow, that contrast made every small victory feel enormous. Every successful inspection, every completed room, every decision I made without asking anyone's permission felt like proof that I was capable of more than anyone had given me credit for. The rooftop deck came together in early spring. Carlos and his crew built a beautiful platform with built-in planters along the edges and a pergola that would eventually support climbing roses. I installed the LED lighting system myself, working late into the evening, with Caleb holding flashlights and passing me wire nuts. "Oh, this is going to be incredible," he said as we tested the lights for the first time. The warm glow illuminated the space, transforming it from a construction project into something that actually looked like a sanctuary. "I can't believe I'm actually doing this," I said, looking around at the space that was slowly becoming real. "I can," Caleb said. "This is exactly the kind of thing you do. You see what something could be, and then you make it happen." The plants came next. I spent a whole Saturday at 3 different nurseries selecting perennials that would come back, year after year, herbs that I could actually cook with, and flowering vines that would eventually turn the pergola into something magical. Lavender for the scent, mint for tea tomatoes, because there's something deeply satisfying about growing your own food. But the moment that really crystallized everything happened on a Tuesday evening in April. I was across the street installing solar panels with a crew from a local renewable energy company. It was detail work, making sure every connection was secure, every panel optimally angled for maximum efficiency. I was up on the roof, wearing work gloves and safety gear completely focused on the task. From my elevated position, I could see directly into my parents' kitchen window. Mom was on the phone, probably with her sister, gesturing with her free hand, the way she always did when she was really getting into a story. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could read her body language. The animated gestures, the way she leaned against the counter, the expression on her face that meant she was sharing something she found particularly meaningful. Later that evening, back in the basement, I overheard the tail end of a similar conversation. "You know, I think this whole experience has been good for Zoe," Mom was saying to someone on the phone. "She's finally learning some humility, understanding that life doesn't just hand you everything you want." I sat there on my air mattress, surrounded by bins containing my earthly possessions, and looked up at the ceiling where my parents' footsteps created a rhythm of normal domestic life. Learning humility. I almost laughed out loud. At that exact moment across the street, solar panels that I had personally installed were converting sunlight into clean energy for the house that I owned. The house that I had bought with money I earned at the job I had landed through my own effort. The house that was being transformed through my own vision and work. But sure, Mom, I was learning humility. The next morning, I watched from the basement window as the solar installation crew finished their final connections. The system would be fully operational by the end of the week, generating enough clean energy to power the entire duplex and probably enough extra to sell back to the grid. My parents had no idea that their daughter was installing sustainable energy systems. They had no idea that their daughter was creating something beautiful and functional and entirely her own. They just knew that she was learning humility in their basement. The irony was so perfect it almost felt scripted. But it also crystallized something important for me. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. This wasn't even about showing them what I was capable of. This was about building a life where their opinion of my capabilities became irrelevant. Stone by stone, room by room, plant by plant, I was constructing something that existed completely independent of their approval or understanding. And that felt like the most powerful thing I'd ever done. The morning I moved out, I woke up at 5 a.m. for the last time in my parents' basement. I'd planned this moment for weeks, not the drama of it, but the logistics, the quiet efficiency of finally stepping into the life I'd been building in secret. I rolled up my air mattress methodically, the vinyl making that familiar squeak that had become the soundtrack of my temporary existence. I packed my bins one last time, but now it felt different. This wasn't containment anymore. This was transition. I left a note on the folding table that had served as my desk for 8 months. Found my own place. Won't be needing the basement anymore. Thank you for letting me stay. Love, Zoe. Short, clean, no anger, no accusations, just facts. I loaded my car in 3 trips. Amazing how 8 months of life could fit so efficiently when it had been forced into storage bins. The shower caddy went in last, and I almost laughed thinking about how that stupid plastic container had come to symbolize everything wrong with my situation. By 6 a.m., I was carrying my first box into my duplex. My duplex. The word still felt surreal, even after weeks of renovation. The morning light streaming through the new windows made everything look different than it had under construction lighting. The refinished hardwood floors gleamed. The kitchen with its sage green backsplash and updated appliances looked like something from a home design magazine. The living room, painted in that soft gray that Caleb had helped me choose, felt spacious and calm. This was home. Actually home. Not temporary. Not conditional, not dependent on anyone else's approval or convenience. I was setting up my coffee maker in my own kitchen when I saw movement across the street. Mom was in her kitchen making her morning coffee when she glanced out the window. I watched her do a double take, then press her face closer to the glass. She was staring directly at me, standing in what she clearly recognized as the duplex that had been under renovation for months. The confusion on her face was almost comical. Then I saw the moment of recognition, followed immediately by what looked like panic. She disappeared from the window. 2 minutes later, both my parents were speed-walking across the street in their bathrobes and slippers. Dad was trying to tie his robe while keeping up with Mom's determined stride. They looked like a comedy sketch, except their faces were dead serious. I opened the front door before they could knock. "Zoe," Mom said, slightly out of breath. "What are you doing here?" "Good morning to you too," I said calmly. "I'm making coffee. Would you like some—" "You moved out?" she continued, her voice rising. "Without telling us, we woke up and found a note. A note, Zoe." I leaned against my door frame, still holding my coffee mug. "Like how you moved me into a basement without asking—" The question hung in the air. Dad stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Is this supposed to be payback?" he asked. "Some kind of revenge for letting you stay with us?" I looked at both of them standing on my front porch in their pajamas, demanding explanations for my independence, and felt something settle into place inside me. "No," I said quietly. "This is peace." "Peace," Mom's voice cracked. "Zoe, we had no idea you were even looking at places. We thought you were focused on your job, on getting back on your feet." "I was getting back on my feet," I said. "Just not in the way you thought." "How did you even afford this?" Dad asked, gesturing at the house behind me. "This place was a wreck when it went on the market. I bought it," I said simply, "with the job I got 3 months ago and the down payment I saved. Same way anyone buys a house." They both stared at me like I'd announced I was moving to Mars. "3 months ago," Mom said. "You've been working for 3 months. At Nestwork Designs. I'm a junior architect. Sustainable building design." I took a sip of my coffee. I probably should have mentioned it. The silence stretched between us. I could see them trying to process this information, trying to reconcile the daughter they thought was learning humility in their basement with the daughter who had apparently been building an entirely separate life. "Do you want to see what I've been working on?" I asked. Without waiting for an answer, I led them through the house. I watched their expressions change as we moved from room to room. The polished hardwood floors, the updated kitchen, the bathroom with its deep soaking tub and subway tile. Everything clean, modern, functional. "Zoe," Mom said softly as we reached the living room. "This is beautiful." "Thank you," I said. "But you haven't seen the best part yet." I led them up the stairs to the second floor, then up a smaller staircase that Carlos had built to access the roof deck. The rooftop garden was everything I dreamed it would be. The planters I designed were overflowing with herbs and flowers. Lavender, mint, basil, cherry tomatoes climbing up the trellis. The string lights weren't on, but they created geometric patterns against the morning sky. The small fountain I'd installed bubbled quietly in the corner, and the hammock swayed gently in the breeze. From up here, you could see the whole neighborhood. You could see my parents' house with its perfectly manicured lawn and traditional landscaping. You could see the lives of everyone on the street, but from a peaceful distance. Mom walked to the edge of the deck, running her fingers along the lavender plants. She started, then stopped. It's beautiful, Zoe. Really beautiful. Thank you, I said. She turned to look at me, and I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen in months. Respect, maybe, or just recognition. How long have you been planning this? She asked. Since that night, I heard you telling Mrs. Henderson that I was figuring things out in the basement, I said. Both my parents went very still. I wasn't figuring things out, I continued. I was figuring something out. The difference between those two things turned out to be pretty important. Dad cleared his throat. Zoe, if we made you feel unwelcome... You didn't make me feel unwelcome, I interrupted gently. You made me feel invisible. There's a difference. Mom sat down heavily on one of the planter benches. We thought we were helping. We thought you needed time to figure out your next steps. You never asked what I could build, I said, gesturing around the rooftop garden. You only told me where I could sleep. The words came out without anger, just as a simple statement of fact. But I could see them land. We never asked, Mom repeated quietly. Nope. You assumed I was failing because I was struggling. You assumed I needed to learn humility because I couldn't immediately land my dream job in the worst hiring market in decades. You assumed that making me smaller would somehow make me stronger. I sat down across from her on the edge of the fountain. But I didn't need to be smaller. I needed space to grow. And when you couldn't give me that space, I had to create it myself. Dad was standing by the trellis, touching the climbing roses that were just beginning to bud. This must have cost, he started. Less than you'd think, I said. Turns out when you buy a house that needs work and you're willing to do a lot of that work yourself, you can create something pretty amazing on a reasonable budget. And your job, Mom asked, is exactly what I hoped it would be. I'm working on LEED certifications, designing energy-efficient systems, helping people build better. It's what I trained for, what I'm good at. I gestured toward the solar panels visible on the roof above us. Those panels will generate enough energy to power both units of the duplex and sell excess back to the grid. The rainwater collection system waters the garden. The whole place is designed to be as sustainable as possible. Mom and Dad exchanged a look. You did all this, Mom said, while we thought you were learning humility? I finished. Yeah. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like something settling, like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. I'm proud of you, Dad said finally. I should have said that months ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of you. Mom nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. We were so worried about you being too proud to accept help that we forgot you might need different kind of help. I didn't need you to solve my problems, I said. I needed you to believe I could solve them myself. Mom reached over and took my hand. Can you forgive us? I squeezed her hand back. There is nothing to forgive. You did what you thought was best. I did what I knew was necessary. So what happens now? Dad asked. I looked around my rooftop garden at the plants that were just beginning to bloom, at the space I'd created for myself to think and breathe and grow. Now I live my life, I said, in my own space with my own rules on my own terms. I paused, taking in their faces. And you're welcome to visit anytime, but you'll have to come upstairs to do it. 6 months later, my life looked nothing like what anyone had predicted. I got promoted to senior junior architect at Nestwork Designs, which came with a salary bump and my own office with windows that actually opened. Jennifer started bringing me to client meetings, trusting me to present design concepts and field questions about sustainable building practices. You have this way of explaining complex systems that makes people feel smart instead of stupid, she told me during my performance review. That's a rare skill. The duplex had transformed into exactly what I'd envisioned and then somehow become even better. The rooftop garden was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. The tomatoes were producing more than I could eat. The herbs were so abundant, I started making my own tea blends, and the lavender had attracted a small ecosystem of bees and butterflies that made the whole space feel alive. That's when Maya suggested I submit some photos to Garden State Green, a local blog that featured eco-friendly architecture and design. "This rooftop setup is exactly what they love," she said, visiting one Saturday afternoon to help me repot some plants that had outgrown their containers. "Sustainable design, urban gardening, innovative use of space. You should definitely apply." Maya had become more than just my real estate agent. She'd become a genuine friend, and honestly, maybe something more. She had this way of seeing potential in everything, including me, that made me feel capable of more than I'd ever imagined. "I don't know," I said, deadheading some roses. "It's just my little garden." "Zoe," Maya said, putting down her trowel and looking at me seriously. "You designed and built a completely self-sustaining rooftop ecosystem in under a year while working full-time and renovating an entire duplex. This isn't just anything." Oh, so I submitted the photos and a brief write-up about the design philosophy behind the space. 2 weeks later, Garden State Green featured my rooftop garden as their spotlight project of the month. The article called it an inspiring example of how sustainable design can create beauty, functionality, and peace in urban spaces. The day the article went live, my phone started buzzing with texts. Caleb sent me the link with about 15 fire emojis. Maya called to congratulate me. Even some colleagues from Nestwork reached out to say they'd seen it. But the message that surprised me most came from my dad. "Saw the article online. Very proud. Mind if I come by this weekend? Would love to help plant something, if you need an extra pair of hands." That Saturday, Dad showed up with work gloves and a flat of basil seedlings from the local nursery. "Thought you might want to expand the herb section," he said somewhat awkwardly. "I know you mentioned making your own tea." We worked in comfortable silence for a while, preparing the soil and spacing the seedlings. It was the first time in years that we'd done any kind of project together, and I'd forgotten how methodical and careful he was with his hands. "Zoe," he said, finally sitting back on his heels. "I owe you an apology." I kept working, but I was listening. "We thought we were being practical, giving you a place to land while you figured things out. But we never asked what you actually needed. We never asked what you were capable of." He gestured around the rooftop garden. "This proves we didn't know what we were talking about." I looked at him, this man who had raised me, who loved me, but who had somehow forgotten to see me as an adult capable of solving my own problems. "Apology accepted," I said. "But trust takes time." He nodded. "I understand. I just want you to know that I'm willing to put in that time." We finished planting the basil in companionable quiet, and when he left, he hugged me goodbye for the first time in months. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected email from my cousin Brooke. "Hey Zoe," it read. "I saw the article about your rooftop garden, and I had to write to tell you something. Remember when I visited and saw you in the basement, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because I felt sorry for you, but because something about the way you handled it stuck with me. Long story short, I was in a terrible living situation with roommates who treated me like garbage, and I kept telling myself I should be grateful for cheap rent. But after seeing what you did, how you didn't just complain or accept what you were given, but actually built something better, I realized I had more options than I thought. I found my own place last month. It's small and I'm eating ramen more than I'd like, but it's mine, and I can breathe there." "You didn't just move out, Zoe. You moved up. And you showed me that was possible." "Thank you." I read that email 3 times sitting in my kitchen, with my morning coffee looking out at the life I'd built. It hadn't occurred to me that my choices might impact anyone else, but apparently they had. Maya started spending more weekend time at the Duplex, helping with garden projects and bringing takeout for dinner. Our friendship was evolving into something deeper, built on shared appreciation for design sustainability and the satisfaction of creating beautiful spaces. "I have an idea," she said one Sunday evening as we watched the sunset from the rooftop. "What if we collaborated on some projects? Your sustainable design expertise and my knowledge of the local real estate market, we could help people renovate in ways that are both beautiful and environmentally responsible. Like a consulting partnership, I asked. Exactly. Green renovations for people who want to do better but don't know how. The idea excited me more than I'd expected. It felt like a natural extension of everything I'd learned building this place. These days, my evening routine is exactly what I dreamed it would be during those months in the basement. I finish work, come home to my own space, and spend time in the garden. I water plants, harvest herbs for dinner, and watch the light change as the sun sets. Tonight, I'm lying in my hammock under the string lights, reading a book about permaculture design. The rooftop garden glows softly around me, lit by the warm LED lights I installed last spring. The fountain bubbles quietly in the background, and I can smell the lavender and mint carried on the evening breeze. From here, I can see my parents' house across the street. The lights are on in their kitchen, and I can see them moving around, living their evening routine. We have dinner together once a week now, but on my terms, in my space. The relationship is different now, more honest, built on who we actually are instead of who they thought I should be. Sometimes I think about that girl who was sleeping on an air mattress in the basement, convinced she was failing because she couldn't immediately bounce back from a nationwide economic downturn. I want to tell her that the basement isn't the end of the story. It's just the place where you figure out what you're actually made of. I want to tell her that being uncomfortable isn't the same as being stuck. That sometimes the people who love you most will have the smallest vision of what you're capable of. That you're allowed to outgrow their expectations, even if it disappoints them. I want to tell her that creating boundaries that protect your peace isn't selfish, even when other people call it extreme. But mostly, I want to tell her what I learned building this rooftop garden. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to grow where you're planted, and you're allowed to move to where you bloom. If you've ever had to create a boundary that felt extreme but saved your sanity, drop it in the comments. You're not alone. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to make yourself smaller to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be. Trust me, the view from up here is worth it. If this story inspired you to create your own boundaries and build the life you deserve, hit that subscribe button for more stories about people who refuse to stay small. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply living well.